Hi everyone, it's great to have you here. I'm Victoria, I'm part of the Croissant team tuning in from the UK, as I said. It's really great to have you here today for our second webinar in our series. You're very welcome. So I'm very excited to introduce Zoltan Szalas, who's our CEO and co-founder here at Croissant. And he's going to be having a chat with Scott Mackin, who's the CEO and co-founder of Hello Operator based in Barcelona. So over the next 30 minutes, Zoltan and Scott are going to be discussing how the workplace has become variable, the shift in the workplace market, and what leaders can and should do about it. We'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. So as they are talking, if anything comes up, if you've got any questions, please drop them in the comments, and we'll keep track of them and try and answer them at the end. And as well as that, Fernando is going to be dropping some links and other information as they talk that might be relevant. There'll be a link to book a demo with us at the end as well, so keep an eye out for that. The session's being recorded, so afterwards we'll send it to you and share it with you. And with that, Zoltan, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I know everybody's day is busy, so you guys taking 30 minutes out of your day means a lot to us. And I want to say, like, continue to check back, because this is a webinar series where we are exploring ideas about the future of work, not just from one perspective, but what we're really trying to do over the next couple of months is to bring you series where we talk to people from finance, people from HR, employees. I believe we even have somebody from one of the AI companies coming on to talk about the future of work. So continue to check back in. We're going to be doing these bi-weekly, and it's going to be a really fun exploration into ideas and concepts of what the future of work is going to look like, because we are in a very exciting time right now. Everything is shifting so fast. Today, we're going to take a look at it from an operator standpoint, somebody who's an OG, who's been in the business for quite a long time, has shifted out. Scott, great friend, have worked with him. So, Scott, I'm going to ask a question that I think is on everyone's mind. Where the heck are you working from, and how do we get there?
Well, thank you, first of all, Zoltan, for having me on, and thanks, Victoria, for the great intro, and to the whole Croissant team for putting this on. I think it's a wonderful series. I'm calling in from Barcelona, from sunny Barcelona, where we've had a very good stretch of nice weather. So I figured I'd show it off as my real virtual background here. But I've been here for about 15 years on and off, running a couple different businesses, and probably the most relevant one for this conversation is a co-working business where we grew before, during, and after COVID. A premium co-working platform across Barcelona, Madrid, and even overseas into the UK, into international waters there. And so a lot of the things we learned kind of have shifted or changed in the way companies work today, and how that changed so much just in the last 6, 7, 8 years, and COVID being a huge catalyst for how companies are structuring their teams and going to work. So that's kind of the context and background that I'm bringing into the conversation today. But I also run companies as well, digital companies, a remote and hybrid company as well. So I'm very used to kind of both sides of the table of both building and operating the facilities that these teams use to operate, as well as being an operator myself and having my team across borders and across countries and working in that async hybrid remote environment. So, I love this topic. I think it's one of the most fascinating, rapidly changing, dynamic areas of business today is how do companies work, and how are they structuring their teams across borders? Zoltan, what are you kind of seeing from your perspective in the market, how teams are working today?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So you know, we're so what we really see is, and I'm going to continue to say this, and it's no surprise, but there's a seismic shift happening, right? Teams are more distributed. I mean, headcount plans change faster than than anything like ever before. Budgets are under pressure. All of that is being accelerated by AI. Fractional work is accelerating. Scott, I think the other day when you and I were talking, we were kind of throwing this stat back and forth that by 2050, 50% of the US workforce is predicted to be like some sort of consulting or fractional. So what we're really seeing is like on our end is, and I was just speaking to some HR and CFO leaders this week, is everybody's trying to figure it out. People are not really sure if they're going to be hiring 20 people by the end of the year or if they're going to be laying off, 40, 50 people by the end of the year. So we're in this transition period where there hasn't really been a framework that's emerged where companies can come in and they can say like, oh, you know what? We're going to actually do this or we're going to do that. So right now we're still in this phase of companies really trying to figure out of like, what is this framework that we look at our hybrid and remote teams? Is it a hub and spoke model? Is it purely remote? Well, now there is the RTO. So there's all these different sort of frameworks, concepts that are coming out, but there's not a one size fits all. And I think a lot of leaders are still trying to figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah, totally, totally. And I think I was actually wrong on that stat. I went back and looked at it, and I think that date of when the U.S. market especially hits 50% fractional or freelance work or contractor work employees is 2028. So we're like two
Oh,
years
okay.
away from it. Yeah, it's
Okay.
already over 40% of the workforce in the U.S.
Yeah.
is a contractor or is a freelance, independent consultant. So we are looking at almost half the workforce or half the talent pool. So if you're hiring for a full-time position, you don't have access to the full talent pool. You have access to half. And so I think that's uh, leading executives and team leaders and founders to say, okay, I can't live with half. I want the best. So I have to be more flexible as far as who we approach to join our team, whether that's in a full-time capacity or if we're going to do a fractional hire. And then obviously that leads to the convergence of another massive trend, which is the hybrid and remote workforce, which was kind of forced on the workforce during COVID. These are trends that are already happening just with the advance of technology to allow people to work remotely. But obviously, COVID was the big catalyst, and that was this kind of sink or swim, trial by fire mentality of like figure it out. You can't come into work anymore, so figure out your home office, figure out your remote workers. So the workforce took a lot of that on their shoulders, and now in the last few years, we're starting to see this pull of like, well, let's get back into the office. There's these RTO or return to office mandates coming through, and we're seeing a lot of pushback and friction from teams. And I don't want to make any big generalized statements because every company is different, every industry is different. But I think it's something like 50% of teams now are at least working in some hybrid capacity. And you know, as this matures, people have adapted. They've adapted their lives to working remotely or working in a hybrid capacity. So going back to a 5 day in the office model isn't really a feasible, or at least not a turnkey option. And I think you're getting a lot of pushback because the professionals, the talent side of the equation will just say no, and they have other options. They're the best performers. So it's really amazing to see like how people are adapting to that and how companies are structuring that, and that's what I find really unique, especially in a city like Barcelona that has such a diverse talent pool and so much flex workspace here. And I
Yeah.
think it is one of the European leaders in flexible workspaces when it comes to square meters. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of a really interesting phenomenon taking place right under our feet right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the you've been in the game for a while and you were sort of at it when you would say the word co-working or flexible workspace and people would look at you like you have six heads and be like, "What is that?" So you've been kind of at the forefront of it. So, from an operator standpoint, you were almost always just like a little bit ahead of the trend, right? Where we know that usually in real estate it's the other way around, is the supply side is always kind of behind. So being sort of at the forefront of that trend, like how are operators and landlords kind of like what you were, how are they responding to this? And how should leaders of companies, like if you're in HR or finance, like how should you be interpreting that, right? So like operators are responding in this certain type of way, and how should HR and other leaders be responding to that? And how should they be sort of trying to develop a framework of how to view this new world?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think from the operator point of view, it's gotten easier because when we first got in like late 2010s
Mhm.
and started building, we went after the premium side of the market. So we really wanted to create like a very attractive workspace experience for our members and for our customers, so that like they could almost use that as a talent acquisition or retention strategy. Like if we built a beautiful workspace, they would be have an easier time attracting talent to work for their companies within our buildings. The problem we had was convincing landlords to give us space in their buildings because it's a very traditional industry. We're talking commercial real estate. This goes back
Yeah.
hundreds, if not thousands of years, and the model's very fixed, right? They just kind of need their 4% yield and that's it. So trying to convince them that, hey, you should dedicate a quarter or a floor or a percentage of your floor plan to flex operators or to at least a flex model was kind of tough. That's changing. Now it's gone from like this kind of like push, we have to push our model on the landlords into like they're pulling us into their buildings. They're saying, hey, we do need an operator in here, or at least we're going to try and do it ourselves. We want to have a flex floor in our building, which is creating more inventory for the market, which is great. And it's also from the operator standpoint, we have a great offering to the market. We're actually delivering a business model that companies are asking for. They don't want to sign a 5, 10, 15-year lease anymore. They want something more flexible. Like you were saying, they don't know if their headcount's going to go up, down, stay the same over the next few years. So having a 1 or 2 year outlook, or even month-to-month contracts, is so much more attractive for the finance and CFO's office to say, hey, let's not put down any fixed overhead here if we don't have to, especially if we're expanding into new markets. So we were offering something that the CRE market couldn't, right? We could offer these kind of like arbitrage models on
Yeah.
on fixed overhead. From the perspective of the companies, I think they can take advantage of the situation because everything's in flux. There is excess demand when it comes to CRE in most markets, including tier one properties. There are negotiations that can be made, and the alternative is these spaces sit empty. So I think from the CFO's office, there's an opportunity to really be aggressive in your negotiating tactics to be able to get favorable lease agreements or contractual terms if it's with a flex operator.
Mhm.
And then from the HR staff, it's like, well, let's not rush into these fixed footprints. We can kind of do like a try before we buy, and then expand or collapse as necessary as we know our needs. So I think it's led to this much more fluid and figure out as we go approach, which is it sounds great from an overhead perspective, but it's very challenging from an operating perspective because you don't know what you're working with, you don't know the assets you have under management, you don't know what you can deliver to your employees and what they can count on. So it creates a lot of trickle down impact on the workforce in terms of what access do they have to workspace and what makes sense. And if I want to get my team together, do I have, budget? Do I have flexibility? Do I have ownership over that? And so we've talked a lot about like, who owns that decision? From your side, do you see a specific team in companies that are taking ownership over this? Does it fall on middle management? Does it fall on the HR team, people ops, or is this like the finance office decision?
Yeah, I think just to touch on like what you said is like there's a transfer. It sounds like there's like a transfer of risk happening, right? Where it's like before companies used to bear all the risk, take on these 15, 20 years leases, and now that risk is kind of being more evenly distributed among CRE owners, operators, and the companies, which I think is good because that just sort of equalizes the market, right? From the operational standpoint, like what we're sort of seeing is as work becomes more variable, right? So it becomes less fixed, less tied to location. Companies are going more towards where the talent is, right? So that brings up a lot of sort of complexities about figuring out like what does my workspace program look like, right? the reality is right now it's what we're seeing generally is it's owned by committees, right? It's usually owned kind of like you touched on a couple of them, like HR, CFO,
Hmm.
probably like workplace experience or facilities. There is not, in a lot of cases, there is not sort of like a clear line item owner, perhaps, or so to speak, but it's more of like, it's more of like a cluster of leadership, like a cross-functional leadership committee that comes together and says, okay, like this is our workspace strategy. This is how we're going to tackle it, and this is what we're going to do. And they're still trying to figure a lot of that out, right? I mean, you have you have a lot of options out there, right? So after COVID, like, starting in the 2010s, as you mentioned, co-working became sort of that answer, right? Of like smaller, more parceled leases to answer the demand. But I believe we're sort of in a new era now where it's even more it's even more parceled out, right? Soon as companies decoupled hiring from instead of saying to the talent like, hey, move to New York because this is where all the great companies are, companies instead said, you know what, we're just going to go to where the talent is, right? And companies have been able to take advantage of that. So that operational point becomes it just becomes a lot more complicated. There's a lot more overhead, right? And there are different ways that companies try to solve that, right? They kind of pressing the easy button. It's like, okay, we'll just do, reimbursements, right? Like, hey, everybody gets $200 a month, and here's a corporate credit card or here's a virtual card, and just sign up to whatever's closest to you and call it a day. Um, but the reality is, I was just talking to somebody who's been yesterday. She was with a big Fortune 100 for about 15 years working in facilities and workplace experience, and she was talking about that they're sort of split. Like part of their part of their locations were RTO, then they had a lot of remote people, and then they had some hybrid people. And she was talking about how although the experiences all around were inconsistent, one thing that was sort of dominant in terms of behavior and attitude amongst employees is that employees wanted more purpose-driven spaces. So I think space is sort of evolving to more of like, what is the experience that we want to cultivate when they come into this space, right? Like it's no longer just from the signals that we're hearing, it's no longer just about like, oh yeah, everybody come in 3 days a week and just kind of sit around and work. But it's like, what we're seeing in our data is like R&D teams, their biggest use case is rituals, right? So they need it a couple of times a month. Sales teams, they want to travel around, they want to have a professional place to meet clients. So it's coming down more about use cases and purposes for what your needs are and what your workforce needs are.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because you tend to get caught up on the financial side of things and say, well, what are these fixed costs? Or is anybody using the space? But then there's the actual experiential level, and it's like, is this still fit for purpose? Like companies that were locked into 10-year leases before COVID are still in those leases. And so like, is this location still relevant for our team? It based, people moved, they relocated during the pandemic, and then even if they come back, we have
Yeah.
all become like experts on Zoom calls. Like we like live on Zoom and Slack and Google Meetups and Hangouts, and so like look, like neither of us got stuck on mute today. Like we're getting good at that. And so and because of that trend and that change, it's like when I'm designing a workspace, I have to think about like, okay, I need more phone booths, call areas, quiet rooms, conference rooms, and because if you walk around any co-work space, I'm actually in a co-work space right now, and there's more phone booths on this floor than I've seen in any co-working space I've ever been in, and they're all full all the time. So it's like you can't have too many, and then they start building kind of ones that are like half phone booths, but they're all being used because people know that they have to jump on calls, either internal or external. So when you talk about the larger enterprise companies on these RTO situations, like they're coming back to like broken facilities or facilities that just don't match the needs of the team, right? They may be like big conference rooms and definitely not enough breakout areas. And then things also broke down, like broken chairs and broken desks. I'm like, are there enough seats? Like people are coming into work and they don't even have a place to sit. So they're spending the first hour of their day just like where do I even go? Like, it's like,
The
why am I
raccoon in the HVAC system.
yeah, like why am I commuting an hour each way to sit in traffic, be stressed out, find parking, pay for food downtown, pay for my dry cleaning, like leave my kid at daycare, all these things that like you have to now think about that you didn't think about when you were at home, when you worked out your personal
Yeah.
hybrid or remote situation. So there's the experimental level is a real thing, and what I've seen is it falls on the teams and the team leads. So if it's the product team or the sales team, it's like they're just kind of like spending 5, 10 hours a week or a month on like just coordinating and who's available when and what day should we meet and like where should we meet, what's central, and this is a burden. This is like a tax on their time and their brain power. It should be going towards their job and their profession. It's like going towards just like logistics. So,
Yeah.
I think there's a strong need now, like you said, like we've reached this post hybrid era where it's like this isn't like a perk, this isn't like a stipend, this isn't just some extra you can kind of flash around as like a benefit. This is infrastructure, and I think teams need to think of it that way as like, hey, we need to manage this just like we manage anything else. It should be measured, it should be governed, and there should be oversight on this, and it should be transparent in a way, not just like in a fair way, but also just in a clear way of like, what do I have access to, and how do I get to it, and what tools are available, what resources are available for me to meet with my team.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there are some really, I mean, some pretty advanced tools out there. Like I've talked to facility managers that have heat sensors in conference rooms so they know if it's two or three people in a conference room and for how long and how many. So a lot of that data for these bigger companies that actually have fixed sites, they do actually have a lot of that data right now. It's just coming down to actually like consolidating it, using it, and then making the decision of like, okay, do we actually need offices or do we just need perhaps maybe a space where we have some open seating and then kind of like you said, like a ton of phone booths with some conference room, right? So it kind of comes back to like purpose, this purpose-driven idea of like having a purpose-driven place to work and a purpose-driven experience, right? And like kind of going back to what you asked me before is like how are companies sort of solving this and the stipend thing, like the thing with the stipend is like the stipend is fine. Like it's a very easy button. But the problem is like, you have to figure out like what are you solving for? Are you solving for cost
Mm-hmm.
reduction? Are you solving for talent strategy, acquisition or retention? Are you solving for collaboration and culture? Are you solving for geo expansion or client-facing professionalism? Like these are all things you have to keep in mind. And my quirk with stipends as well is like, I've led teams of 100 people plus, and these stipends essentially become almost like compensation, right? So it's like employees don't no longer think of it as like, hey, I have a place to go to meet with my team every 2 weeks. They start to think of it as like, oh, okay, so now I get an extra $3,000 a year. Okay. And then now if you have to change that policy, it becomes very difficult because they almost look at it as like, I have comp being taken away from me, right? So I think
Yeah.
there's just like a little bit of a, a mismatch. And oh, Victoria came off of camera. So I think it's either time or we did something wrong. What's going on, Victoria?
No, no, I hate to cut you off because the discussion is super interesting, and I think there's a lot more that we could carry on talking about. But I'm just conscious of everyone's time, and we want to be respectful of that. And I want to leave some time for questions. So I do apologize for cutting you off. If there's specific questions you guys want to ask, please drop them in the chat, and we'll get them answered. Um, we've got you were just finishing on stipends, so we've got some question coming in on stipends and sort of corporate cards, and I think you're starting to touch on this before I jumped in and cut you off. um
Sure.
so Zoltan, do you think the question is, do you think stipends fail at scale, and if so, why do they fail? Is it governance, is it visibility, is it both, is it neither?
Yeah, I think the easy answer is it's all of the above, right? I mean, I think stipends can work if a company just wants the easy button and say, you know what, we don't want to think about it. We're gonna give everybody 200 bucks a month and it is what it is. It works fine, right? But like if when you think about governance of perhaps the sales team has a different need than the engineering team, right? And thinking about it in terms of that and thinking about collaboration enablement, right? The selection bias or the selection overhead that comes with it, right? There's no professional consistency. Like when you actually think about like, I think it always goes back to sort of like um going back to like first principles is like if you're trying to figure out your workspace strategy, what is the core problem that you're trying to solve, right? Again, is it like cost reduction? Is it culture? Is it collaboration? Because that's going to inform what you do. If you're trying to have a better culture or improve talent retention, perhaps stipend not be the best way because that's not really solving the problem that you have. That's just giving you the easy button. So I wouldn't know if it's specifically scale. I think it kind of goes back to like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve with your workspace program, you know?
Got you. Cool. Thank you. A question for Scott here. So this person says, what should a company think through before entering a new market, and especially if they're not sure how long they'll need the space there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased, but I think co-working is a natural landing spot for entering new markets and not getting sucked into any sort of fixed overhead. Uh, and it's all there's also just the real social play too, in that co-working spaces create a kind of a soft landing and a networking space for your team or your whoever's launching that market, where you can instantly get connected to different stakeholders in the ecosystem and people you need to meet, and you'll find a lot of value just in the serendipitous nature of collective spaces. But since like I said, I don't like making large sweeping like you know claims or advice for any companies because every company is so unique. But I think like what Zoltan was saying was like the first thing is like know what you're measuring for, when it comes to your workplace strategy and what your needs are, like know what it is you're optimizing for, and then try something, right? Whether it's co-working or it's a short-term, fixed lease. I've seen some things in the market now, like the last couple of years that have been it's a similar contract to co-working, but it's a fixed or let's say a private space. So it's like co-working, but without the coworkers. It's just your company, but it's like HQ as a service. And this has been kind of popping up it kind of first started rearing its head before COVID, but really it's starting to gain steam the last few years, and at least in these markets. Um, but I think rapid iteration, once you kind of know what you're optimizing for, being able to test quickly, audit your usage, audit your spend, audit the experience your team and your employees are having, and then double down on what's working, and so it's like test something, but then quickly change and iterate when you need to, and yeah, reinvest in the parts that your team's getting value from. That was, I said, like the two big things. But then, yeah, like I said, it's like treat it like infrastructure. It is, this is real spend, and so there's a lot of slippage and leakage here. So I think it should have the governance rules of any other expense item you have on your P&L.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you so much for that. Thanks. A huge thank you to you both. We've run out of time for questions today, but thank you so much to Zoltan, to Scott for your time. It's a great conversation. Thanks for answering our questions. This meeting was recorded, as I said, so we'll share a copy with you very soon. You can revisit everything. Zoltan mentioned this is part of a series, so we hope to see you at our next webinar in a few weeks' time. If you've got any questions, Fernando's dropped a link to book a demo with our team. Please do book that. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to buy you lunch at a co-working space. If you're in Barcelona, that co-working space that Scott's at looks perfect. Yeah, it's like a walking advertisement there. But yeah, again, thanks very much. Any questions, please do give us a shout. Thank you again, Scott and Zoltan.
Thanks so much for having me.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.